historical fiction author chat. Good morning to Margaret deRosia. Thank you very much for joining me today.
Oh, thank you for having me.
I'm excited. This is Margaret's debut, and waiting to hear her bio. She's a teacher, she's a genius, and now we get to read her first book, which is right here. And it's beautiful. It's very different from anything I've been reading, which is always nice, right? I love what I've been reading, but it's nice to shake it up a little bit. So thank you very much, Margaret. So I will now read Margaret's bio, and then we're on to the synopsis, and then I put the spotlight on Margaret. So sit back and enjoy. Margaret deRosia is a writer, editor, and historian originally from Michigan. She's taught film, literature, and digital media at the University of California at Berkeley and Santa Cruz, Sonoma State University, the California College of the Arts, and Western University. Eight Strings is her debut novel. She currently resides in Toronto with her wife and two cats. And one of them is named Penny, and one of mine is named Penny. So maybe they'll be on screen today.
She may make an appearance. Yes.
Yes, mine too. Who knows? All right, so Eight Strings. Ever since her grandfather introduced her to eight-string marionettes, Francesca has dreamt of performing from the rafters of Venice's popular Minerva Theater. There's just one problem. The profession is only open to men. When her father arranges to sell her into marriage to pay off his gambling debts, Francesca flees her home. Masquerading as a male orphan named Franco, she secures an apprenticeship with the Minerva's eccentric ensemble of puppeteers. Amid the elaborate set pieces, the glittering limes, and the wooden marionettes, she finds a place where she belongs and grows into the person she was always meant to be, Franco. The past threatens to catch up with Franco when his childhood friend Anella reappears and recognizes him at the theater. Now a paid companion to an influential woman, Anella understands the lengths one must go to survive, and she promises to keep Franco's secret. Desire sparks between them, and they find themselves playing dangerous games against the most powerful figures of Venice's underworld. With their lives and the fate of the Minerva hanging in the balance, Franco must discover who is pulling the strings before it's too late. Rich in historical detail and imbued with sharp social commentary, Eight Strings is a gorgeous, spellbinding debut that celebrates love, life, and art in all its forms. And yeah, it was really different for me. Starting off with the marionettes. Never thought about that. And your details. Okay, all right. I'm going to disappear now. That's my job now, is to throw it over to you, and we are all ready. Thank you.
Wow. Thank you for that lovely introduction. And yes, I'm actually going to read from the first chapter. So to kind of get you right into the action, just like Franco is. So I will start right here. And we open in Venice in 1895. That's when the novel starts. I lifted up my newsboy cap, squinting at the stage door in the dark. It was much too early for anyone to arrive at the Minerva Theater, but I had no place left and no chance at sleep. I tried crouching against the wall, but my heart raced too fast to sit. So I paced and waited for dawn, sweating in the fog along narrow Calle Traghetto Vecchio, clutching my satchel in one hand and a knife in the other. Indeed, no one did come for hours. It was mid-morning when two men approached from the canal. Distracted by desultory talk of bad knees, they ignored me and stopped at the Minerva. One of them I recognized from the newspapers, the theater's director, Pietro Radilo. All night my mind had spun with how I might plead my case. Now I froze as the director unlocked the heavy iron door. My mouth went dry. Speech fled. Radilo pulled the door with some force, a bracing screech after hours of silence, and the men disappeared inside. I had no choice. I couldn't go back home. So summoning my courage, I strode over to the theater with more confidence than I felt. At my knock, the man who had accompanied Radilo peered out. Tawny and lean, he greeted me with only an arched eyebrow. I am here to see the director, Signor Radilo, I said, trying to kill the quaver in my voice. To audition. He shook his head no and started to close the door. Wait, I protested, withdrawing my grandfather's letter from my jacket. I have a recommendation from my teacher, famed in Verona. This is what I have trained for, to join the Minerva Theater of Marionettes as Signor Radilo's apprentice. Please? After a moment, the man took it and tore the seal. I fidgeted as his owlish eyes darted across the page. Then, without a word, he left the door open for me to follow. Soon we were winding through a labyrinth of dark, smoky wings, the floor fresh with sawdust. The burnt smell of last night's gas lamps and limes hung in the clammy air as we traveled fast to a worn oak door at the back. At the man's knock, a voice replied, "Come in." We entered an office where Radilo sat reading on a pale green divan. He glanced over his scuffed spectacles, first at me and then at the man who'd brought me in. "Who's this, Leo?" "The boy wishes to audition," Leo replied. "He has a letter you might want to read." Radilo took the letter. Up close, he was older than I expected, but spry, in his late 60s, perhaps. His skin was tanned and lined like leather, but his blue eyes were clear and intent on the words my grandfather had scrawled hastily last night. Feigning that he was a famous but itinerant Veronese puppeteer and I his protege, my grandfather had written that I was a diamond in the rough, primed to shine on Radilo's artistic fare. It wasn't true, but I hoped it would be enough as I gripped my trembling hands behind my back. Radilo folded up the letter and tucked his spectacles in his pocket. "Well, don't just stand there. Let's see what you can do." "Here? Not on stage?" I asked. I'd envisioned a great height from which to drop the marionette down. To climb into the Minerva's rafters would also conceal me. In this cramped office, I felt too seen. "I can gauge well enough from here whether your esteemed teacher inflates his claims." Radilo spoke with the derision of a man who knew the outcome long before a situation unfolded. "Besides, I need to see your hands on a holder and how you move. Leo," he signaled to the other man, "go fetch him something." "No, thank you, sir. I have brought my own." I withdrew my grandfather's elfin Carlita from the satchel. Rapidly, I unwound the strings encircling her walnut holder's pegs. Then I steadied her stance and held my breath to start. When I lifted my left index finger and right thumb on the holder, Carlita's hand extended toward Radilo in greeting. He moved to grasp her hand, but I withdrew it, making her skip in a turn and pace with her back to him, uncertain but proud. He laughed, and I tilted her head back to mimic him, too nervous to make eye contact with Radilo myself. Next, I began to make Carlita dance, shuffling her feet as if debating whether to let Radilo see her face and veering from his gaze at every turn. When Radilo cajoled her to come forward, I felt his interest deepening. So I stepped her into profile, angling her head in imitation of his curiosity. I lifted her modified eyebrow string and made her curtsy, an action more daring than deferential. "No voice?" Radilo said. "How can I know this flirtatious girl if she does not speak?" In response, I made Carlita swoon, hands near her chest. "Oh, but for one dance with my beloved Scaramuccia," I cried in a false, girlish voice and swept up her long black hair as if preening at a mirror. "I would sooner die than live without his eyes upon me." "Why, look, here he comes." I threw the last words to appear as if they came from farther back. Before I could do more, Radilo stood up. "Have you ever worked a proper stage?" he asked me. "No, sir." I nodded at the letter still in his hand. "My teacher handled marionettes and more at the Malibran just down the street." Part of that was true, I thought. My grandfather changed lights at the Malibran shows. "Ah, the People's Theater," Radilo said. "Modern-day gladiators, I suppose, given how often the censors shut them down. Not much puppetry there now, but it's where I had my start many years ago. How long were you training with him?" "Since I was a child. He saw something in me." "He saw well. Your voice, too. Odd, like it's neither you nor her." He glanced at Carlita and then scanned the letter. "What's your name again?" "Franco Collegario," I bowed. I wish to train with you, sir, as an apprentice here at the Minerva. He drew closer. This time I forced myself to meet his eyes. How old are you? He asked. 18. Any family? No, dead, I lied. Your accent, he said with hesitation. Pure Cannareggio. That is where I grew up. Rodillo folded his arms. An orphan foundling lands on my doorstep, straight from the Ghetto Nuovo. The city is teeming with your kind, desperate and poor. Why should I give you a chance? I trained on 8-stringed marionettes alone. They are all I wish to perform. Whole and serious performances like yours, not cheap glove puppet stalls in the street or mere comic sideshows to actors. Most places still only use 2-stringed marionettes. You're the master, the one who invented the art, who made marionettes art. I lifted Carlita up to make the point. That's what I want to do. I learn fast and am strong. I will work hard, you'll see. You are bold to show up on my doorstep, he said. But I like that. You read or write? Both. The image of my grandfather tracing the words of a book for me flickered, but I banished. Really? Rodillo leafed through the thick yellowing tome he'd been reading when I came in. It was Boccaccio's early Renaissance classic, the Decameron. He held it open in front of me and tapped the page. Show me. Read. Dear friends in the grove, I began. Behold how history marches forward to forget the past. Rarely can we see what truths have been buried by time. Rodillo snapped his fingers, halting my reading. He gestured to Leo. Take him to Carmine. We're down a man these days thanks to that ingrate Stefano running off. Auditions take too long and we'll need help for the fall. Rodillo turned back to me. Don't even think about stealing. Leo, our stage manager here, will know. As an apprentice, you'll come to the theater every day but Monday. Watch the shows every night, same spot, back of the pit. Good thing you're tall. You're not ready for the stage, not yet, but for now, you will learn repertoire and technique from Carmine, one of our headmen. He paused. Of course, we'll see if you last the week, Franco. Being an apprentice is harder than you think. But take heart, there's no cleaning. We have women for that. After the horrors of my night prior, I stood stunned. It had worked. I was in. I heard Leo clear his throat. Thank you, sir, I said. Thank you. I rushed to shake Rodillo's hand, but Leo hustled me toward the door. Over my shoulder, I saw that the director was once more buried in his book. Leo led me back through the unlit theater, and I struggled to keep up, the satchel clunking at my thighs. I stuffed Carlita back inside, entangling her strings. Cafe Titian's nearby, he called back to me. Carmine's there. I already knew the cafe. Yesterday morning, my grandfather and I had gone there for practice. We'd hovered at the curled tip of its mahogany bar. I'd watched men come and drink and go, tossing cigarettes into the gutter that beggars darted out for. Yesterday, we thought I had plenty of time. Months, not hours, to prepare. We hadn't known what my father had done, or that the neighborhood mafioso Tristano was coming for me that very night. I remembered my grandfather at the cafe, how he'd drawn close. It's working. No one looks twice. You're more yourself as a boy, not less. They think you're one of them, Francesca. For yesterday, I was still a girl, Francesca, not Franco. Not yet a boy or a man, never mind a puppeteer. Today, my aim was both more and less modest, to survive.
Yes, beautiful. You have a
Thank you.
beautiful reading voice. It's so
Oh,
relaxing.
thank you. Oh, good. I try not to rush, so,
Yes,
savor the tension.
it makes a difference, and you have such a smooth voice. That's really nice. You probably get some of that from all your teaching experience, eh?
Yes, yes. When you lecture, you have to learn how to enunciate a bit like an
Yes,
actor.
I bet. And you've taught film, literature, digital media. You've taught everything. So,
Yes.
and it looks from all the universities and colleges that you've done it for a while. So,
Yeah.
how did this book finally emerge into the world? Had it tucked away somewhere? Have you been thinking about doing it, or how did it work?
Well, I initially, so my training was, in part and then eventually professional work as a teacher. I was as a historian, but none of fiction was not on the radar at that point for much of my academic life. But I think I just decided for fun to take a creative writing class with this wonderful coach and editor, Marnie Woodrow, a Canadian writer. And she, as part of this class, would come up with like personalized prompts based on kind of conversations that we'd had, and one of her questions to me was kind of, well, what if you were doing anything else beside your current work? What would you be doing? And I said, oh, I'd want to be a puppeteer. Like, I think I've always had a lifelong kind of fascination with puppetry and in all its many forms. And indeed, had no idea really until later I began to research this book, just how much more there is to the history globally, really. But yeah, so I, really began what I thought was a short story and kind of just a fun side project of writing that story. But I had that magical experience that kind of almost never happens, where I sat down and I wrote 80 pages in one night. And it was like, I think this is a little more than a short story at this point. And she was like, oh, you should keep going. And the prompt was really about the director, who is a real life figure, Pietro Radillo, who is, as I mentioned, kind of invented, or one, at least in the Italian setting, the 8-stringed marionette, which is often a more standard one than what had been used in prior to that period, which is two to 4 strings. So, and when I went to look up this figure, there was very little initially about him, just this kind of 2-line bio, really, that he had lived in Venice and he invented the 8-stringed marionette. And so I thought, oh, well, then I began writing and I wrote this story, but that kind of other figure came into play, which was Franco, this kind of teenage tomboy turned queer puppeteer that is running away from home. And so I kind of used Franco initially as a lens upon which to look at this historical figure and this real life theater. So yeah, and I started to kind of build on that 80-page arc, which really did have all the major characters who have remained in the book, and but a few changes, a few significant shifts, I would say, from start to finish. However, and I was just at the point where I was going to start, I thought, oh, I think I have it ready to go. I think I can start querying agents. And then my mother got quite sick with Alzheimer's and Parkinson's disease. And so I became her primary kind of caregiver. And so all writing had to go on hold. And after she died a few years ago, I had a friend who said to me, he's like, that 8-strings novel, I think you really need to pull it out of the drawer. It's very good. And I think he was encouraging me to kind of come back to writing. And I did. So I sort of had like 2 waves of working on this book with a significant gap of about, I don't know, 6 to 8 years kind of in between. But I sort of benefited from the delay because new historical work came out and new materials emerged. However, then I had to research those too. So,
of course.
But yeah, that was how the novel came to be. Kind of a roundabout, long journey. So if there's writers out there feeling like things take a while, I'm with you. I understand.
Yep, it's not quite the glorious burst onto the stage kind of thing that Franco experiences. He does very
No.
well here. So
Yeah.
I loved learning, like you can totally tell that you're a historian because the way you delve into, well, the details of the puppetry is beautiful. And then getting into the back alleys and the characters and how they all work together, it was so obvious that you're a historian, except you did not write it as a historian, which I really
Okay.
appreciate. It's so easy, and I've talked about this before, it's so easy to just throw out everything you've learned out there and say, look how much work I did. But I
Yes.
think the art comes from bringing those alive, and you really, really did that. So I really want to thank, right off the beginning, Franco took me down this kind of gritty alley, and I thought, oh boy, this is going to be exciting. And It was really fun. So, and the characters that you brought in, I I have a thing for Carmine. I got to tell you, I really like Carmine, and
Me too.
especially
Yeah.
Margaret. He's I liked him a lot. So did you learn to do any marionetting? Do you have? I can see over your shoulder that you've got a
I do have a
little.
couple. These are actually behind me, two beautiful puppets from India, a king on the bottom shelf and the queen on the top shelf picking out. So yeah, I have a few. I don't have like I would not say I have any particular skill. If you look in the bibliography at the back of the book, there are a number of sources I consulted, and would try my hand at it to make sure that I had some sense of realism to the best of my abilities. And often now, when I get the rare moment to actually see someone who a marionettist at work, like sometimes you can see them. So I would try to seek out sort of things to look at how people's bodies move, or kind of how they. I saw, for instance, a puppeteer kind of operating a marionette that was puppeteering another marionette, and so I worked that into the novel in one of the puppet shows. So, but no, I would not. I would not subject you to a puppet show. I think my own skills.
You might need to get one for yourself. I have a friend,
Yeah.
Susanna Kearsley, who said whenever you put out a book, you need to reward yourself with something special.
Oh,
And
that's lovely.
she's always done that, and I've tried to do that, but I buy myself stuff all the time, so it's the same. But I think you should have a puppet, because you had me going. I was moving. You said the first finger and your thumb, and he was trying to move
Uh-huh.
one to make her wave and turn her
Yes.
head, and I thought, okay, so if I did, but I've tried when I was a kid. That's impossible, but it's amazing that you delved into that. Thank you. And
Yeah.
and you also went into, of course, the Francesco Franco story, which I found fascinating. Of
Yeah.
course, it's been going on forever, but we never think about it. So, what
Mhm.
prompted you to open up that discussion, that whole history?
Yeah. Well, I think that, we certainly have seen plenty of stories of kind of given the historical limits and exclusions kind of upon women entering certain roles and professions. We've seen stories in which usually a girl or a young woman kind of really wants to enter that space, or must enter it in some way, and so we
There's
get.
a lot of them with soldiers dressing up and going.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
Mulan, yeah.
Yes, that's right.
um, and there is that story that we've seen very often, and usually it's kind of circumstances force it in some capacity. But often the story has been told from this perspective of like, oh, it's kind of torturous to be another gender that you are not in truth, and so often that there's a cost to that, and it's seen as a disguise and a masquerade. And I think that I wanted to explore a story in which that was not the experience of the character, that although circumstances do push, at the beginning, Francesca to play this role, to sort of don this disguise, she as a girl has never felt kind of at home in her body. She doesn't come from a safe family, she's, belittled, physically abused as a girl. There's ways in which she doesn't also fit as a girl. There's a sense of her not kind of belonging in her body to some degree. And so what happens upon donning the disguise is a kind of revelation of, oh, perhaps I am more this new person. This disguise is more truthful. And so but it doesn't happen overnight. It sort of takes time, and there's quite a bit in the beginning where, Francesca as Franco is kind of living in terror and anxiety of the discovery of this, because there is as much as Italian literature and stories and operas kind of do also paint this kind of tale of passing, gender crossing, that very often it is it is seen as temporary. It's either comic, it's kind of contained in a comic sphere through, say, Shakespearean comedies have feature it, certainly in an English setting, like, but it is either that, or we get a quite, horrific, often traumatic tale where the person is punished for that crossing, that transgression, literally. And so I wanted to explore a story where the experience was not necessarily one of disguise and or threat or trauma, but really kind of coming into oneself. And this isn't a period, we've seen, if you've seen the recent television adaptation of Gentleman Jack, it's a character who can be female, but has kind of masculine attributes. It's sort of like a butch version of a woman, really. And but that character, Anne Lister, has kind of money, has resources, has, privilege, has social standing. And I wondered, what would it be like to have these kind of experiences and feelings of oneself, but you certainly don't have the capability to fully experience them or be out in a traditional sense, or a contemporary sense, I should say. Franco can't be like Anne Lister because Franco doesn't have those kinds of privileges and access to money and social standing. So but I was also curious, just to kind of wrap up like that, what would it be? How would you come to know yourself in the absence of any representation? Like in today's environment, we have lots of stories that do tell that tale and kind of offer you a lens onto how you might see yourself. And there wasn't quite that same element, outside of Shakespearean plays.
Well, I thought it was beautifully done. And I have to tell you, Franco might have been scared about being discovered. I was scared about him getting in fights. And I thought he was just going to get killed. But, he's pretty good.
He's a hothead. Yeah, he's a bit of a hothead. Yeah.
Well, I really appreciate it. Oh, wait, I wanted to ask you one more thing. After all this waiting for this beautiful story to come out, have you got another one planned, do you think?
I am working on a new novel, very different though, and it really looks at more of a near historical setting. I've always been fascinated by the post-war kind of World War II era, like the sort of mid-40s into the 70s, and so I'm really interested in going back to that period to look at a kind of series of mother-daughter relationships, and also to begin to kind of explore. Partly based on some of my own experiences as a caregiver with dementia, like around the questions around history, memory, and memory loss in a mother-daughter relationship. So it's going to be a pretty different setting, I think, crossing New York, Toronto, and Michigan. So
I hope it doesn't take 6 to 8 years for it to come up, because
it'll come faster.
Well, thank you very much for coming here today and chatting with me.
Oh, thank you too. It's been such a pleasure to be here. And I must just want to say before we go that I happened to read The Forgotten Home Child while I was editing, and it was so interesting because a lot of this book really looks at, as one historian referred to them, this kind of ambiguity in the period in Italy of the child in danger and the dangerous child. And so it was really interesting to read your work as I was writing and to think of these lost children who end up in Pinocchio is a wonderful fable, but the Disney version doesn't really capture the conditions under which the original was based, which was these vulnerable children kind of enduring, kind of getting caught in the wheels of history. So it's wonderful to talk to you as someone who wrote a book also about it. I think that's vulnerable
really
children.
It's such an important aspect to bring out because we don't know that. And here in Canada, we don't talk about what we might have done wrong in the past. And we're also squeaky clean. And to bring some of this history to light has been, I just love it. I love being able to do it. I love being able to learn because I'm not a historian. I am unlike you. I know nothing about history. And I slept through it. It was, I don't know, the way it was taught or the way my head was working. I didn't get it at all. And then I got older and I thought, geez, I know nothing, and now I can't stop. It's just
Oh, yeah.
it's
No,
wonderful.
I think you can call yourself a historian
Okay.
officially, actually, at this point. So, yeah, no, I would often begin my classes with people saying to them, okay, you're about to read and see if it was a film class or, read if it was literature. Is like, I want you to think not just about what you're seeing, but sort of who's not in the room as well, who's not telling the story, who's not considered valuable enough to gain a perspective in history, or make up the historical account, or the only account you get is such a distorted one that it doesn't truly reflect who you are in the fullness as a person. So, I think that's one of the things that I really strive to do with my fiction writing now is to be able to go into those ordinary people's lives and hear those perspectives, that kind of the ghosts and the gaps in history, which I think you do as well so
Well,
beautifully.
you did a beautiful job. Again, everybody, here's what we're looking for.
Thank you.
Launching
Thank you.
right away. Exciting.
Yes.
Debut.
March 14th. Yes.
We will
Yes.
be watching. Thank you again so much for being here and for chatting with us all and introducing us to the book with your beautiful
Thank you.
voice and listening. It was very mesmerizing for me. So, and I already read that, so I still loved it. Um,
Oh,
so thank you very much. Best of luck with the launch and with the whole life of the book and with the next one.
thank you so much. So wonderful to talk to you today.
Thank you. Take care.
Thanks. Bye.